The drug companies have controlled the world of medicine. And what if they do overvalue the synthetic drugs and they cause more disease than they really help? And what if the surgeries are mostly unneeded waste? Then everything they do might be wrong, and they seriously might have to really look at healthcare. You see, it's a pharmacological fact that to use a synthetic anything is an insult to the body. And the FDA, the drug companies, are sitting on the evidence that this is true. They know that the natural works far better than the synthetic and is much more safe and effective. And yet they're sitting on this evidence, not really telling us. We're going to look at a story here from Frontline about the medicated child.
Frontline is made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. With major funding from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, helping to build a more just world. And additional funding from the Park Foundation, committed to raising public awareness.
Notice there are no chemical companies or drug company advertising. Maybe we'll get a little bit of the truth now.
In 2001, Frontline reported on the dramatic rise in the number of children being given behavior-modifying medications.
We cannot, as a nation, continue to play a game of Russian roulette with our children's lives.
Leave our kids alone. Don't label. Don't run.
The medications were the subject of fierce debate. Today, the concerns over medicating kids continue.
911 flash report. Ambulance, and my daughter passed away in the night. What's going on? How old is she? My daughter passed away.
And now, 1 million children have been diagnosed with a new and controversial diagnosis.
I have bipolar, but taking my medication makes me more like I'm supposed to be.
In the morning, she takes 2 Trileptal. Jessica can't live without medication.
The drugs used to treat it are powerful.
These are not benign drugs. You don't use them lightly.
And many are untested.
Many of these drugs are not adequately tested. None of these drugs are really fully tested. No drug is fully tested for long-term safety, not one. The side effects are observed. The side effects are not tested. And observed means that these side effects are found during the public's use. The data is twisted to make profit. Bribes and promises get registration. Research is done for profit, not for people.
Because he is so young. Okay, we'll open these first.
Tonight on Frontline, the medicated child.
Hi guys, you're all here. Wish Jacob a happy 2nd birthday. This is all for posterity, you know. When he's president, you know, and they're like doing backstory on his life and stuff. Speak of the devil.
Happy birthday, Jacob. I can't read.
Oh, and you're the writer, huh?
That's why I'm not the reader.
Oh, I got it.
Jacob's story begins in Los Angeles back in 1993. That's his dad, Ron, a scriptwriter in Hollywood. And Iris, his mother. Until Jacob was 3 years old, his parents say, he had no big problems.
This is Jacob at work. What are you today, a shoemaker?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you making?
House.
But sometime after his 3rd birthday, Jacob would begin down a path taken by millions of American children. It started when a teacher suggested he was hyperactive.
He got kicked out of Mommy and Me's. You know, it was 2.5-year-old kids, 3-year-old kids. And they were saying he has no impulse control. And we were arguing with them, saying, well, what 3-year-old has impulse control?
In preschool, another teacher suggested medication.
Her opinion was that there was a chemical situation going on with this child that maybe medication could help.
Does anyone think about diet or the effects of dextrose, sugar, and chemicals. That's what's really happening here. Look what these kids are eating. If we look at the side effects of these drugs called sugar, we're going to see this child could be easily helped with diet and behavioral therapy.
But we thought, a 4-year-old? I mean, what, why put him on pharmaceuticals at age 4?
Boy, yeah.
He's a little kid.
For a year, the Solomons resisted medicating Jacob, but teachers persisted.
Teachers push, and they're after that quick fix with the pill.
Finally, Jacob's parents took him to a doctor.
Regular smile, regular.
This is a pill pusher doctor that they looked at.
Jacob was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and prescribed Ritalin.
Some of these doctors can only see pills. Ritalin use is incredibly, it's taking off, it's fantastic. And they use Ritalin to teach the children that drugs are the solution for all their problems and to worship the drug companies. And the doctors are taught to ignore the warning on the label.
Can I try, please?
You know what? We're not going to give you the...
The Ritalin helped with the hyperactivity, but it made him anxious.
I just want to hold the videotape for 1 minute.
And so then we'd end up giving him a second medication to deal with the anxiety. And then the second medication would cause something else, some compulsive behavior or a tic. And then they'd say, okay, give him a third thing.
You see, we have a pill for this, and then a pill for the side effects, and then another pill for those side effects, and another pill for those side effects, and another pill, because all we care about is pills, and the profits of the chemical companies. People have written books about the overdose, and our children are becoming this experimental field where we dump all this different drugs, and it's done for money. Not for people, but profit.
And so finally it was like that whole, there was an old lady who swallowed the fly, and then the fly, she had to swallow the spider to get rid of the fly, and then she had to swallow the mouse to get rid of the spider. That's what the meds were like.
Can you say happy birthday, Teresa? Can you sound a little more excited?
At age 9, Jacob was diagnosed with a mood disorder. Doctors tried drug after drug,
It's bedtime.
stimulants, antidepressants, and antipsychotics. By age 10, he had been given 8 different medications.
8 medication. Does anyone consider the diet? The high glycemic index of the different foods that he's eating? Look at the popcorn and the sugars that their child's are eating.
It all started to feel out of control, so we decided that we wanted to just strip him off of everything. And we have no idea how we got on as many meds as he was on. So we just made a decision. We got to pull it back. We got to sort of strip it out and see what we actually have here.
Jacob was hospitalized and taken off all his medication. But he was about to be given what was, at the time, a new and controversial diagnosis for a child: bipolar disorder.
They stripped him down off of everything, and then within 24 hours they turned around and said he's bipolar and needs to take lithium.
So
There was no like, well, isn't there therapy? Nowhere we ever turned was there this therapeutic, was this therapeutic solution. There was nobody ever said, well, we can work with this and through therapy and things like that. Everywhere we looked, it was take meds, take meds, take meds.
And look at the sugar on the table. Can you see the problem? I can. It's on the table. It's right in front of him. Look what the kids are eating. There's different sugars creating different problems, and the pills are just trying to cover it up and treat. We have these sugar holidays, and we push this sugar because big sugar is controlling. And in the 1950s, we didn't have very much iatrogenic disease, and we had much more natural drugs. It started to change as more and more patents came in, synthetic drugs. And as the patents and the synthetic drugs increase, iatrogenic deaths increase dramatically.
Then, suddenly, on the morning of his 13th birthday, Jacob woke up with a stiff neck and started rolling his head, a possible side effect of all the medication he'd been taking.
most of these doctors were experimenting. They had no clue. And were just saying, try this, try this.
Try this, try that, try this. Try this means try this pill. It's always a pill. It's always a synthetic patented medicine. Are doctors under the influence? Well, of course they are. That's all they're taught. They're taught drugs and surgery. Drug, 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 or cut, cut, cut. What if they really do overvalue the synthetic drugs and they cause more disease later than they help? If somebody suggests is natural, they're booted out of the drug company.
There's nothing worse than seeing your kid, go through something like this.
Over the last 10 years, there's been a steep rise in the diagnosis and treatment of childhood mental illnesses of all types. ADHD, depression, autism, and anxiety disorders. But the biggest controversy has been in the diagnosis of bipolar. Formerly called manic depression, it was long believed to exist only in adults.
That was because adults were given those drugs, but now that we're giving those drugs to children, we're starting to see bipolar effects in children.
The diagnosis of childhood bipolar grew out of a series of studies by a group of child psychiatrists at Massachusetts General Hospital, led by Dr. Joseph Biederman. He theorized that many children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder were actually misdiagnosed.
In 1996, an article is published that announced that 23% of his ADHD population also meet criteria for bipolar disorder. Okay. This was an astonishing announcement that caught most of us quite by surprise, because the notion that even a teenager be diagnosed bipolar was very, very rare.
What he did was he took the written criteria for attention deficit disorder, and he took the written criteria for bipolar disorder, and he said, hey, a lot of these kids that you call ADHD actually fit the criteria for bipolar disorder, which I think attracted a whole lot of people. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, bipolar disorder suddenly was being diagnosed left, right, and center.
Our big story at 6, dramatic increase in the number of kids diagnosed as bipolar. Could we really be seeing?
Since Dr. Biederman and his colleagues published their findings, there has been a 4,000% increase in the number of children diagnosed with bipolar.
The question is, should we call them bipolar, and should we be giving them 3 different medicines when they're only 2 years old? And I can tell you that's happening all over the place when they're 2.
The rates of bipolar diagnoses in children have increased markedly in many communities over the last 5 to 7 years. I think the real question is, are those diagnoses right? And in truth, I don't think we yet know the answer.
We're not even really looking for the answer. We're looking for a drug. And until we know more, we should not allow the drug companies to make profit hurting these children. It should be people, not profit.
What you've got out there is a whole lot of kids who've been diagnosed with a condition that hasn't really attained respectability yet, and they're receiving medications that have not been fully tested in children.
Today there are 1 million kids being treated for bipolar, more and more of them at younger and younger ages.
They're starting to force this bipolar because the drug companies want to sell more. They're not looking for the effects of sugar and other things in the diet. They're not really looking at those factors.
He's 4 years old. His doctor believes he's bipolar.
Why don't you come take your medicine?
I just got chunties.
DJ takes Focalin extended release in the morning, a dose of Focalin in the afternoon, clonidine to sleep at night, and Risperdal to quiet his tantrums.
Bipolar in adults has traditionally been treated with drugs like lithium. Now there are new antipsychotic drugs called atypicals.
Oh. It's a little worrisome to me because he is so young. You know, I don't know what the long-term side effects are going to be for him. I do know if he didn't take it, though, I don't know if we could function as a family. It's almost a do-or-die situation over here.
It's not do or die, it's do or diet. Look what the child's eating.
One of the drugs DJ is taking, Risperdal, is an antipsychotic, commonly used on bipolar kids. It's known to cause tics, drooling, and incessant eating.
He's just insatiable, hungry all the time. So whatever you put in front of him, he'll eat, and he'll want to keep going and going and going. Their stomach never tells their brain it's full. So he could be stuffed and he'll still want to eat because he thinks he's hungry.
Look at this. There's unchecked hunger is one of the effects of the high fructose corn syrup. Look what the child's eating. Nothing but junk food, high glycemic index food, and high fructose corn syrup. This creates these problems. This creates obesity, this creates mood disorders, irritability, and all the symptoms of these children.
I can eat like goldfish.
Goldfish and cookie?
Yeah, and Gatorade.
And Gatorade.
And another Gatorade.
And another Gatorade.
And corn dog.
And another corn dog.
Some kids gain up to 100 pounds on antipsychotics and go on to develop diabetes. Christina says that despite the risks, they had no other choice.
Kaya, come here. Treat, treat. He loses total control, and it's scary. You okay? And he's had rages that'll go half the day. He'll even sit on the floor and howl or make almost animalistic noises.
And hit himself?
Hit himself, hit his head on the wall. He'll go after anyone that's around him.
I have hot medicine. I have hot medicine. I have hot medicine.
There are also more unusual, repetitive behaviors that DJ's drugs haven't changed.
Medicine. I have hot medicine. I just have hot medicine. Hot medicine. Hot medicine? Yeah.
You see, the numbers of mothers that are exposed to synthetic drugs equals the idea of what happens to autism. All these different chemicals are having effect on the children, and we should be able to keep them out of their womb. It really is true that the synthetic chemicals create these diseases.
Christina says life with DJ is still a roller coaster. When the medications wear off, his old behavior returns.
DJ! Stop. Stop. DJ, we can go see Dr. Bacon. What do we go to Dr. Bacon for? Good job.
Hey guys.
Hello. How are you, Dr. Bacon?
Hi, Dr.
Good.
Bacon. Go play with the dog.
Dr. Patrick Bacon has been treating DJ's older brother Michael for ADHD. He started seeing DJ 9 months ago.
DJ, you're going to break it, please.
So how have things been going?
Better.
Better?
Better than our last visit, yeah.
With the increase in Risperdal?
And the extra Focalin in the afternoon.
Uh-huh.
Because there are no definitive tests for any psychiatric illnesses, Dr. Bacon chooses DJ's medicine before he knows the diagnosis.
Definitely.
Oh, what? What did you say? You do what? You, without a diagnosis, you're treating?
How do you decide what medication to give a child?
The things that influence what medication to give would involve, my best guess about what is the diagnosis and largely what has been tried in children that age.
The Risperdal seems to be quieting the tantrums or the rages more.
But with so many drugs on the market, getting the right treatment can take a long time.
20 years ago, there were only a couple medications to choose from. So now we have more mood stabilizers, we have atypical antipsychotics that work pretty good for mood disorders, and it's made it easier to think, well, this symptom might respond to that, so let's try it.
The first time we gave it to him, it was like switching like turning the light switch off, like he completely...
You have to experiment or let them continue to be symptomatic.
You called it an experiment.
It's really is, to some extent, an experiment, trying medications in these children of this age. It's a gamble. And I tell parents, there's no way to know what's going to work.
Okay. An option would be we could go higher still on the Risperdal and see if that would just slow them down more, or look at a more typical mood stabilizer. And
On this day, Dr. Bacon is reluctant to up the dose of Risperdal because of the risk that DJ will develop tics.
We have to just sort of...
Instead, he adds a fourth prescription for Trileptal, a powerful mood stabilizer used to treat bipolar.
They're just reaching for straws. You see, the problem with these children is not a deficiency of drugs. These children have problems. The problem with these children is synthetic chemicals, sugar, and the drugs. These are the problems, not the solutions. The more synthetic chemicals we give a child's mother, that creates the risk of autism, learning disabilities, and all these different things. You see, where we have the synthetic drugs, we see these diseases. And what if they do overvalue the synthetic drugs?
Of course, if there's a problem right away with the Trileptal, like he sleeps all day long, or it makes him real nauseous and what have you, give me a call right away.
Say thank you. Say bye, Dr.
Bye.
Bacon.
Nice to see you.
Bye, Dr. Bacon.
Go home and be sure to take your meds.
Many child psychiatrists believe it is impossible to diagnose bipolar in a 4-year-old. There remains widespread confusion in the field. In the Manual for Diagnosing Mental Illness, the DSM, adult bipolar is clearly defined by recurring episodes of mania and depression. The manual says nothing about how to diagnose bipolar in kids, but Dr. Joseph Biederman and his colleagues argue that rapid mood swings, tantrums, and what's called explosive irritability are the key symptoms of childhood bipolar.
You can see that mood swings, tantrums, explosive irritability, these are the symptoms of high glycemic sugar foods. They make your blood sugar rise and fall dramatically and creates problems on the nerves, the immune system, and all the other factors. You see, we have to balance the blood sugar with more natural fruits and vegetables, and those are the foods that we really need to help stabilize the blood sugar and to prevent these type of mood disorders. But big sugar makes a lot of money selling all this junk, and the synthetic chemical industry puts all the junk into it as well.
Criteria for mood disorder in children include something called irritability, but the symptom like irritability occurs in something like 26 different diagnoses. So it probably means very different things in different contexts and to different people.
I think a lot of the controversy has centered around the fact that our kids who have big temper tantrums, a 9-year-old with a big temper tantrum who can't control himself, this happens a few times a week. Is that coming from bipolar disorder? All right, any other thing you want to talk to me about? Or
Dr. Kiki Chang, a researcher at Stanford University, defends Biederman's criteria.
This guy's using the drugs because he makes money on it.
When you take irritability to the extent that some of these children exhibit it, and then when you add the other manic symptoms in there, decreased need for sleep, increased goal-directed activity, racing thoughts, all those things together, you're at least somewhere on the spectrum.
But critics say all the debate and confusion has led to overdiagnosis. And many children with bipolar are being treated by pediatricians and family doctors who are less familiar with the diagnosis.
Doctors will force the diagnosis of the last seminar they attended.
When you're a pediatrician and you're seeing a child every 15 minutes, it's very tempting to go ahead and add one of the atypical antipsychotics when you've got a kid who's oppositional and aggressive. So in a sense, the doctors and the patients and their parents are forced into this Faustian bargain where everybody would like to take the time to think through the problem, but that kind of thoughtful, careful evaluation simply doesn't exist in most pediatrician or family doctor's office.
There is only time to cookbook a pill. There's not time to really do a full diet analysis, health analysis. And what if the whole process of the synthetics is wrong and they are an insult to the body? We need to really look at what if the entire idea of the drug is wrong and the synthetic chemicals that produce autism, but they do make an awful lot of profit. This is not about profit. We now need to realize that these diseases are increasing, iatrogenic diseases, because of the synthetic drugs. And we are just giving our children more and more and more pills.
3 years ago, Jacob Solomon's family moved from Los Angeles to the mountains above Denver.
Tell me when you want to set this up. You want to do that now?
Jacob is now 16.
Okay, we'll open these first.
He remains on a potent mix of medicines, and he still rolls his head.
Risperdal is for anxiety and moods. We've tried different combinations. and found that this seems to be the best combination for him right now. Every time he has a growth spurt, it changes. And which one is this?
So I haven't seen you in about a month, right?
I don't know. I think so.
So how are you doing with the nervousness right now?
I'm good.
You're okay?
I mean, I have a lot of things on my mind, like what am I going to do when I go back to school? What classes am I going to have?
Dr. Marianne Wambolt is Chief of Psychiatry at Denver Children's Hospital.
Last meeting will be sophomore.
So that's better?
She says Jacob is one of a growing number of kids who come to her with a bipolar diagnosis and multiple prescriptions.
What are you doing differently? Jake came to me on about 8 or 9 medications, some of which I had never heard about being used for the purported purposes that they were being used for. So when I first saw him, my initial take was there's too much over-pathologizing of symptoms and over-calling them symptoms that need a medication rather than thinking about other ways to deal with the symptoms. And the family was very open to that, and they really wanted to get him off of as many medications as they could. So Jake, how could we measure your tics?
Right now, they're about maybe 4.
What does that mean? 4?
1 through 10. One's like the best it could be. 10's the worst it could be. Right now it's about a 4. It's getting better. 20 times a minute.
Sometimes tics are a side effect of stimulants. Often when you stop the stimulants, the tics go away. In Jake's case, they didn't go away. It's a tricky thing because we're dealing with developing minds and brains. Medications have a whole different impact in the young developing child than they do in an adult, and we don't understand that impact very well. That's where we're still in the dark ages.
One of the few places that specializes in childhood bipolar is at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. The doctors here say that many of the kids referred to the clinic come in misdiagnosed with a slew of labels.
Maybe new cases then, or new referrals, Tim?
You have 2. One is a 9-year-old. She's going into the 4th grade and has a past diagnosis of bipolar 2, ADHD, ODD, OCD.
They say it can take months or even years to untangle a case and decide whether a kid is bipolar or not.
Irritability, increased sleep tearfulness, some anhedonia.
One thing that's complicated is bipolar disorder is probably not a single unitary disorder. It's probably a syndrome that's a collection of things that are related and can overlap with other child psychiatric illnesses, including ADHD, including depression.
She said these episodes can last like 1 to 2 days.
There is a risk of this being something that is a label that's given inappropriately. So we have to be very careful and cautious about diagnosing a child with this illness.
Right now, but she has verbalized some suicidal ideations.
Okay, she sounds like a good kid for us to see. We're barely getting started at figuring out what might be wrong in these kids' brains. You know, the brain is extremely complicated, and it's going to take us a long time to figure out these problems.
We can't figure this out. We're looking at the drugs, and any doctor who looks at non-drug solutions will be harassed, fired, and persecuted. Its power of the drug companies is so incredibly awesome. In order to we have to get over this profit over people and look at what if it is true that the synthetic drugs are an insult to the body.
And I wanted that.
You would have what?
Dr. David Axelson believes it is a rare case that is clear-cut.
Why? Well, how come you wanted to bust your head open?
But in September of 2000, he was referred a 5-year-old patient, Jessica.
Now, when you were at Walmart, was this sort of a normal kind of happy feeling, or was it kind of different than just having fun?
She arrived at his office displaying textbook symptoms of adult bipolar, including grandiosity and euphoria. Dr. Axelson was so intrigued that he videotaped the session.
What?
Trying to fool those 2.
You were trying to fool them? Uh-huh. What were you trying to do to fool them?
I was trying to take their head away to fool them.
Trying to take their what?
Their head away.
Trying to take their head away. How could you do that?
I can just get a knife and go.
Really? And you wanted to do that to your folks? interesting thing about Jessica is she did really present in the office with symptoms. A great deal of aggression and morbid thoughts and grandiose thinking that she could do anything.
Just jumping off of everything, climbing on everything.
In addition, she had a very clear 2 to 3 week period of depression. She was not caring for herself, not getting out of bed. She was just sort of staring at the wall.
She didn't want to eat. She didn't want to do anything. She wasn't angry anymore. She just wanted to curl up in a ball and have the TV on and not move.
Okay. And
Jessica was diagnosed with bipolar I, the classic form of the disorder. Its hallmark symptom? Expansive, grandiose thinking.
I could even lift them up and put them on the roof and bust their head open.
I see. Okay. Lots of talk about busting heads open, huh?
Hey, how you guys doing? Hey, Jessica, good to see you. Come on back. Nice.
Jessica is now 12 years old. Dr. Axelson still believes she's a clear-cut case of bipolar.
And how would you say your mood has been over the past few weeks?
Pretty good. I cry and scream a lot, though.
You do. And that's kind of a change compared to a few months back, I would say. Has something been bothering you, do you think, in particular? Or something been on your mind or worrying you? Okay.
This girl at school, I'm worried about what she's going to say when I go back to school, what she's going to do because she's really mean.
On top of Jessica's worries about school, Jessica's dad has just been deployed to Iraq.
Does it make you sad thinking about it some? That's totally normal.
There you go. It's okay to be sad.
In the midst of all this, Dr. Axelson has to sort out what are normal childhood stresses and what are the actual symptoms of bipolar disorder that need medication.
There's no scientific answer here about what to do. Well, I think we should try to go up a little bit on the medicine. This is definitely more than just her a usual reaction to the stress, and we don't want to go into school with things being pretty rocky.
Okay.
Okay. Does that sound like a plan?
All right.
Okay.
Some people just don't understand that I have bipolar. It's kind of hard. But as long as I'm taking medication, then I'll be fine. It's the only way to keep me settled down. Taking my medication makes me more calmer, more like I'm supposed to be.
Where's the chocolate cord? Oh, there you are.
We're talking about putting a small child on these heavy medications.
$1.75.
She can't go a day without medication. That it's a big burden for her. She may not feel it now, but I feel it for her. And I wish she didn't have to do any of it.
I guess we better go over to the truck and...
If you ask me, what is the greatest challenge facing American child psychiatry right now, it's in the area of bipolar illness. How should we treat it? We have to know the answer to that question. Are the treatments that we use safe for the brain or deleterious? And the tragedy is not that this question is being asked. The question is that we're not generating the data which will give us the answer.
Virtually all of the drugs approved by the Food and Drug Administration are tested solely on adults. That leaves pediatricians mostly guessing, says Danny Benjamin.
In Washington, officials at the Food and Drug Administration have been aware for years of the lack of research.
But I don't believe they work.
There were not only few studies on psychiatric medications prescribed to children, but on all childhood medicines from cough syrup to eardrops.
Parents need to be aware that all products haven't been studied in children. As a matter of fact, I'd say too high a percentage of the time we don't know what we're doing, and we need to study it in kids and get the dosing right and know whether it works in them.
But drug makers have long been reluctant to run clinical trials on children.
For a number of reasons, it was difficult to get companies to do studies in children. People are always nervous when they do studies in children. There's reluctant sometimes to leave them untreated and use a placebo. But with one thing and another, there were very, very few studies in children.
The rule I announced today will put an end to this guesswork. It will require manufacturers of all medicines needed by children to study the drug's effects on children.
Then in 1997, the Clinton administration offered the pharmaceutical industry lucrative patent extensions as an incentive.
Patients.
The incentive is very powerful for a drug company. If they do the pediatric studies that we ask them to do, if they do them and do them with integrity, they get 6 months of additional exclusivity. That means protection against a generic drug. Well, for a drug that sells a lot, like most antidepressants or something like that, that's worth a lot.
A single extension can be worth more than $1 billion. As a result, the pharmaceutical companies have launched over 200 studies of childhood medicines. As the research has come in, it's become clear that many of the drugs that work in adults do not work well or at all in children. Dr. Andrew Leon of Cornell University was asked by the FDA to review the data on antidepressant drugs like Paxil and Effexor.
I have to say, I was rather alarmed. I'd never seen how few of those trials had been positive, had shown that the antidepressants were more effective than placebo in kids. The clinical lore would have you believe that these antidepressants were very effective in kids, but the data didn't support that.
Children are not just young adults. They react to medication in a different way. They can be more sensitive to certain side effects of medication. Sometimes medication don't work in children. So it's not right, it is not safe to take the information that we know in adults and try to apply them to children.
The antidepressants not only failed to work, some children had serious reactions.
My daughter Cecily had only been taking Paxil for 2 weeks before she died, during which...
In 2004, the FDA held several public hearings.
Start to wrap up. My 16-year-old stepson, Brandon Ferris, committed suicide on July 22, 2001, about 3 weeks after he began taking Zoloft.
The FDA concluded that 4% of kids had an increased risk of becoming suicidal.
She died of suicide at age 12 years, 3 months. Just 8 weeks after being put on Paxil and then Zoloft.
The FDA's strongest warning, a black box, was put into effect. It made big news.
The federal government today moved to warn parents in
The reports alarmed doctors and their patients.
intended to improve young
They can
lives.
sometimes trigger suicidal behavior in children and teenagers.
The label would be required.
If the black box warning led to a more attentive use of this medication, more attention to diagnosis, more attention to side effects, better monitoring during treatment, that was a good thing. If it discouraged treatment of people who needed that, of course, was a bad thing.
It did discourage some. Since concerns were first raised, prescription rates for antidepressants declined, and the suicide rate jumped, leading many psychiatrists to fear that kids who needed antidepressants were no longer getting them.
How did you feel about the black box label being put on antidepressants? Did it seem like a good idea?
Remember, the black box was never intended to say don't use these drugs in children. It didn't say that. We recognized that some people might read the black box and be scared off and not treat people. We were conscious of the fact that by most studies, the rate of adolescent suicide appeared to be declining as these drugs had come along. We were nervous about that, but we felt we had to tell people anyway.
The black box warning appears to have had another unintended consequence. In the confusion over the safety of antidepressants for kids, some doctors turned to antipsychotic medications to treat depression.
We are seeing an increase in the use of atypical antipsychotics, especially in children. And one thought is that those are being used in place of the antidepressants. In a sense, what we've done is we've taken a drug that has very limited risk and replaced these drugs, often with a class of drugs that have unknown efficacy but quite well-known risks. And I'm not sure that that's progress.
The end result is that a very well-studied medication has a black box warning that is very severe.
Again,
and that the very
right.
dangerous drugs out there, like atypicals that are being used in kids, don't have this black box warning. That strikes me as ironic.
The atypicals have a very strong warning against something we know they shouldn't be used for, which is demented elderly people. But our trouble is when you have fundamentally an absence of data, which is largely the case for children, it's hard to write a box.
But you're the FDA. People look at you to sort of figure out, you know, what is the right thing to do for my child.
Yeah, but when there's no data, we can't tell them.
911, my daughter passed away in the night.
What's going on? How old is she?
My daughter passed away.
How old?
She's 4.
All right, we'll be right there.
The danger of prescribing untested drugs to young children grabbed national attention a year ago. Rebecca Riley of Hull, Massachusetts, had been diagnosed with bipolar and was taking a mixture of psychiatric medications. Frontline was visiting the Kuntz family when they learned of the case.
We went to talk to one of the leading proponents of the diagnosis of bipolar disorder in children. He is Dr. Joseph Biederman.
Now you're saying up to 1 million children are running around with this.
The autopsy revealed that she had died from an overdose of psychiatric drugs.
The Kuntzes worried that DJ was on a similar regimen of psychiatric drugs, including the sedative clonidine.
Terrified me,
She was just 4 years old.
especially to hear that there was enough clonidine in her system alone to kill her.
This is what her preschool teacher said. She was like a floppy doll, so tired she had to be helped off the bus.
I mean, to think that there's something on my counter that he takes on a daily basis, that the little girl had so much in her system that alone could have been the cause of her death, terrified me.
I mean, neither one of us are supporters of medicating our kids. You know, that's not why we do this. We do it because we've discussed it with the doctor and it seems to work.
The Kuntzes went back to Dr. Bacon's office to see if they could lower DJ's medications.
So how are you guys doing?
Good. Good.
Have things been going pretty well? Good.
I watched 60 Minutes, and it made me think and wonder, is there anything not medication related that we need to be doing for DJ? I mean, is there any type of classes? Is he too young for therapy? I mean, would any of that benefit him along with that medication?
At this point, I think it's like 99% medication. Plus, it's harder for him to make use of therapy and to make use of any behavioral program if he's still got a lot of symptoms that he really can't control, even if he tried.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're doing absolutely everything that we possibly can.
They're not doing absolutely everything in any way, shape, or form. The harmful effects of the chemicals in the diet are not even addressed in the least. The harmful effects of the dextrose sugar in the diet is just not addressed in the tiniest. The harmful effects of bad fatty acids are not addressed and not discussed. There's no attempt at energetic medicine or natural solutions or safe solutions.
How are things going for him in school?
He likes it once he gets there. The anxiety getting there
Oh, really?
It's a 2-hour battle of
Oh, really?
trying, and please don't make me go to school, let me stay home. And
Wow.
but as soon as we walk in the door, he hangs his backpack up and he's fine the rest of the day.
Okay. Sometimes also what we'll do is try just a little bit of an anti-anxiety medication like in the morning, something like Xanax. And again, it's a trade-off, you know, do you want to see if that will work or do you want to try and coax him into it?
Suffer through for a little bit longer
Yeah.
before we add another one.
Yeah.
Because once he gets there, he's okay.
And my hope would be as we go up on the trileptal, that anxiety will go down quite a bit. And I've seen that happen. So, but let me write to that prescription for the Focalin, and then we'll
go from there.
If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. And if the only tool you have is a drug, you'll see everything as a prescription pad. We're going to see that this doctor doesn't care about the really working. This doctor's only tool is a drug. He sees all of his patients as a prescription pad.
DJ left Dr. Bacon's office with a recommendation to up his dose of Trileptal.
This is my distinct pleasure this morning to introduce Dr. Joseph Biederman.
Thank you very much.
Many psychiatrists continue to follow the lead of Dr. Biederman. Frontline wanted to speak to him, but he has stopped talking to the media.
We published a paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry examining ADHD with or without bipolar disease. And this
His office recommended that we speak instead to Dr. Chang at Stanford.
I'm really excited about medications. People are so concerned about the side effects that they have on children. But one thing that people often overlook are the possible beneficial side effects, if you will. How'd the movie make you feel when you saw that?
Dr. Chang himself has lately been pushing one of the more provocative ideas in child psychiatry.
How about like the thoughts in your head and things like that?
They race through. They race through so fast I can't even think of it.
He believes he can prevent bipolar disorder by identifying and medicating children at risk before they develop full-blown symptoms.
It depends on the day. Sometimes it can take 3 hours. Sometimes it can just be half an hour.
Okay. And the theory is that if you get in early, before the first full mood episode, before too much has kindled in the brain, then perhaps we could delay the onset to full mania. And if that's the case, perhaps finding the right medication early on can protect the brain so that these children never do progress to full bipolar disorder.
Go ahead and talk to me. What's going on?
Bipolar is known to run in families. In order to identify these kids early on, Dr. Chang is relying on MRIs.
We're going to get started now. All right, squeeze the ball if you're ready. All right, great.
He's zeroed in on a cluster of neurons located deep within the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is thought to store a person's emotional memory.
What we've been finding is that in kids with bipolar disorder, these amygdala are significantly decreased in volume compared to healthy kids. They're smaller. Doesn't mean yet that we can use it to diagnose bipolar, but it gives us a pretty good head start in saying, okay, you know what, this is a very important region. Why is it smaller? Let's find out. Let's investigate it further.
Dr. Chang is also researching how the brain responds to antipsychotic medications.
On the use of atypical antipsychotics in pediatric bipolar disorder.
At this year's annual convention of child psychiatrists, he presented the results of 3 new studies on antipsychotics.
This is a very exciting area.
Dr. Chang says the early results are encouraging.
5 years ago, we would have practically no data to give you. We now have reliable, large-scale trials to be able to present to you, and some of these are hot off the press.
But critics point out that researchers who advocate the use of psychiatric medications, like Chang and Biederman, receive enormous support from drug companies, and they believe that these industry-funded studies unduly influence doctors' decisions.
They have these very robust response rates.
Whenever research is funded by industry, unfortunately the research is always going to be suspect. And there's no question that from the standpoint of any psychiatrist looking around at the courses that are being offered, going to the large meetings, reading the journals, that just about everything bears the stamp of drug industry funding and drug industry influence. And it is really one field where it's extremely hard to know who you can trust and who you can't trust.
Very exciting as well as our disclosures. And as you can see here, I have various relationships with these companies. I think it is an uneasy partnership. But I think that without them, where would we be now? We wouldn't have any of these studies now. Parts of this talk.
And yet you call it an uneasy relationship.
It is uneasy because there is still a potential conflict of interest, and definitely that perceived conflict. Even if there isn't a conflict of interest, meaning that, hey, we're going to do our own studies ethically, and we do. But somebody reading the study may say, oh, they received funding from this pharmaceutical company to do the study, therefore the results may be biased. So that is a problem.
Meanwhile, as Dr. Chang continues to pursue answers, others are already claiming to have solutions.
A little bit down towards your feet.
This is Matthew Dietrich. His parents are concerned about his moodiness.
And this is just going to wrap around your head.
For nearly $3,000, this diagnostic center claims that it can identify undiagnosed conditions and help determine the best medication. But this machine is not like Dr. Chang's. It only measures blood flow patterns in the brain, and it's located on a commercial strip in Denver at a company called Brain Matters.
So now what we're going to do is talk about the results from your brain scan. Okay? Are you excited? Are you nervous? No? You're not nervous at all? Good. So this is called the transverse view. And this
At Brain Matters, they believe their doctors can link blood flow changes to behavior problems.
Here, and the back of your head is over here.
Matthew's results are explained by Nancy Goodhue, a social worker.
Coming out like that. Deep in your brain, Matthew, in the middle part of your brain, it's called the thalamo-limbic area, and that's where your emotions live. So this area here, the thalamo-limbic area, should be yellow and light brown, and for you it's red and white and a little bit black. Okay? So this is something that, because of the pattern, it's suggesting to our doctor that Matthew might have some trouble with mood. So the recommendation is for some medicine that actually stabilizes the mood.
They're still only looking for a drug, and if the only tool you have is a hammer, you'll see every problem is a nail. You see, even this therapist is only worried about what drug to give, and she sees her patients as a prescription pad.
The family is impressed.
I'm not.
I think they've done a great job explaining what the results are. I don't really understand the medical terms that are being used, but I think it's pretty much on target.
And so we really have an opportunity to influence his brain between now and the time he's 25. He's 11 right now.
Do you think that it's raising false expectations?
You know, I really hope not. I think compared to the interview, the diagnostic interview and the paper and pencil test that we've had so far, this is just so far and away better. Even though it's not conclusive, it's much, much better than what we've had historically. So these little yellow areas here,
we all want a simple, easy solution for these complicated life problems. My view, to put it very simply, is if it's too good to be true, it is, in fact, unfortunately, too good to be true.
We're at least 5 to 10 years, if not more, off from that being a really reliable clinical tool. Right now, it's strictly a research tool.
But Brain Matters has already reached millions, now with centers in Los Angeles and Seattle, and has been featured twice on Dr. Phil.
We can see the bipolar pattern much earlier in someone's brain.
Meaning those areas on the top of Fred's head do not receive the right blood flow.
Brain Matters is just one example. There is now a cottage industry of diagnostic centers, self-help books, internet sites, and nutritional regimens, profiting from parents' desperate search for solutions.
All right, can we do that?
Absolutely.
Are you down with that? Yes.
In 2001, when Frontline first reported on medicating children, the chief of ADHD research at the National Institute of Mental Health was Dr. Javier Castellanos. He acknowledged then that brain science was in its infancy.
The brain is the most complex thing we know, changing, rewiring itself. And so what we measure are very crude preliminary things, but we've only been at it for about 10 or 12 years. We don't yet have our Einstein. Then, about a year ago...
Dr. Castellanos is now the director of research at the Child Study Center at NYU. We went back to see him to ask if there was a solution to the lack of knowledge about today's psychiatric medications.
I desperately need to know, personally, what in the world these things are about. And I can't figure it out.
We found him brainstorming with other neuroscientists.
So essentially you're entering all the covariates simultaneously, or you're taking the...
Once a year, they meet and try to solve some of the biggest questions in the field.
Really complicated the results. And why should the brain invest so much caloric energy in maintaining...
You used to say you hadn't quite found your Einstein.
Well, I think that we're probably not looking for an Einstein, although it'd be great if one showed up. But I've changed my metaphor slightly, and now I'm thinking more about a kind of group project.
He found that these resting EEG asymmetries in alpha were predictive of task performance.
Dr. Castellanos now advocates doing what pediatric cancer specialists did in the 70s. Back then, childhood cancer was an almost certain death sentence.
Does the antimatter? Constant question.
The model is there. Every child with cancer in this country is part of a study. You can't get treated otherwise. Pediatric oncologists got together and said, we can't do this one by one. We have to form these associations.
By networking and comparing treatment regimens, doctors learned what worked and what did not. The system is still in place today.
We've been able to turn this around so that now it's at least 90% cure for childhood cancers. And that's a huge turnaround.
Everything that happens in the clinical treatment of kids with cancer is set up in such a way that you learn something. You learn something about what cancer is, how it should be treated. Think about the extraordinary public health impact of making that kind of principled commitment. That's what's missing. And in my view, it's scandalous.
The key to conscious relaxation is the simple act of observing and accepting the present state of your body, mind, and your environment. Roll back up.
In the fall of 2007, Frontline revisited Jacob Solomon.
From there, externally rotate the thighs with the use of your hands and come back to center.
His psychiatrist believes this alternative therapy might help reduce his reliance on medication.
Continue to feel the external rotation of the thighs.
My thing is, I've been on 8 medications at one time. I don't want to be that again. I want to get down to the lowest amount that I can. The lowest.
Do you think you'll always be on meds?
Possibly, I really don't know. I really don't know. I want to know, but I don't.
It's got to be something besides...
At school, he struggles academically. He still has bipolar and ADHD diagnoses, but has to be careful about his medications because they can make his tics worse. But he has a new best friend, and he just got his learner's permit. All in all, Jacob's parents say this might be the best it's ever been.
He's started to see a psychologist a couple times a week, and we can already see it making a difference in helping him. He is at a good point, and we can see him starting to take a little bit more control of who he is, and that makes us really happy.
Oh, yeah.
Jessica is now in 6th grade and is doing well in school. But in the last few months, her mood swings have gotten worse. Her mother says she's not sure whether this is caused by her bipolar, her medications, or just the fact that her 13th birthday is around the corner.
What you see is only half the story. There's another side of me. I'm the girl you know, but I'm someone else new. If you only knew, it's a crazy life, but I'm alright. I got everything I've always wanted. I'm living the dream. Yeah, everything I've always wanted. Isn't always.
With a little girl, you think of first prom, and you think of beautiful weddings, and you think of sending them to college. And you have to learn to put your dreams aside and really accept your child for exactly who they are. And whatever she can do, she'll do.
Do you think she'll grow out of it?
No.
You see, years of meds makes you dependent, and it alters normal function. You're not the same. This woman knows this. Getting the child off this is going to be very difficult.
She'll have to take meds for the rest of her life if she wants to
go to college or have a job or have a family.
Drug companies love
What the
dependency.
hard times were and hard times that are to come ahead for her.
The drug companies want you
It's
dependent.
hard.
They want you to take your meds, take your meds, take your meds. No look at a cure, just drugs.
Since the last visit to Dr. Bacon, DJ's medications have been upped yet again.
Show up good.
At first, Christina reported that the increase in dose didn't seem to be helping. DJ was irritable and throwing frequent tantrums.
Tired?
Yes.
In recent weeks, DJ has improved. And Christina still believes the medications are helping her son.
Hard work. Too heavy. Oh.
Helping? We've seen in story after story after story how the drug companies really are putting profit over people. And even people like Frontline, nobody really tells the story. Is it possible that these drugs really don't do the job? Is it possible that these really should be tertiary used and not primary used? You see, when you go see a doctor, all that they care about is just 100% what drug to prescribe. This makes money for the drug companies. And the drug companies are the only ones that can have the money to do the type of research that really needs to be done. And yet they twist and distort much of that research to get things done. They'll use grants and promises of jobs and etc. to get registrations from other different governments, including the FDA. We need to ask a simple question. A simple question of, do these synthetic compounds really work? It's a pharmacological fact that these synthetics are an insult to the body. That's a pharmacological fact. And we need to look at just exactly, do we really want these to be our primary source of medicine? And we also have to look at the fact of Big Sugar. And what Big Sugar has done is also really repulsive, because Big Sugar has made these high glycemic compounds, making our blood sugar go up crazy and come back down. We've complicated this with food additives and other different things that are having neurological disturbances on the body. And for many sensitive children, this sensitive child, this can produce all the different types of diseases that we've seen here in this movie. Diet, it can be the first line of defense to really correct these things. But you see, diet doesn't make money. And research and medicine is all about, right now, making money. It's all about profit. It's not about people. It's answering to the investors who are investing. I want to thank the MacArthur Association and some of the other associations, the Park Foundation, for the work that they've done in sponsoring this. But I think the Frontline needs to go the extra dimension and ask that question. Do we want a medicine that is completely dependent on synthetic drugs? Is that what we want? You see, back in the old days, they had the gold rush, and they said, there's gold in them thar hills. And then there was the patents, and now they say, there's gold in them thar pills. And patents can kill the patient. You see, way back in the 50s, we had much more natural drugs, and we had much less damage. As we start to get more and more synthetics, we start to have more and more iatrogenic disease. It's escalating. As the chemical companies are pushing out natural, and with their new chemicals, they really aren't tested. You really don't know what you're getting. It is a pharmaceutical roulette. And with Ritalin, we're teaching the children to use drugs and to worship the drug companies. Everybody thinks, what's the pill to take? Searching for that pill. Autism, diabetes, these things are increasing dramatically. And it's been found that certain drugs cause autism, but then the drug companies escape liability through different loopholes. And they have massive money in the courts. And Big Sugar is also involved, highly involved, as it creates these problems. And if we look hard for a single cause, then we can ignore the complex issues that weaken the profit. Our children are like the canaries in the coal mine. Big Pharma owns the bankers. The evil bankers are owned by Big Pharma, and they control us. And natural medicine should be the primary choice. We should look at natural ideas, and synthetics should be a secondary or tertiary choice. When natural medicines have fallen, have not worked, you see, then we should use those. And controversy is something that we need to be able to stand up for. And we need to not back down from controversy, but go forward and look for ways to address our lives.